Hello, and welcome to Represent the Podcast, the show where I, Caiti Beth McKinney, sit down with composers from historically marginalized and underrepresented backgrounds and discuss their works for the horn. Hope you enjoy, and thanks for tuning in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Represent the Podcast. I am your host, Caiti Beth McKinney, and today I have a horn player, composer, researcher, educator, Mica Redden with me, and I'm so excited because we are friends who went to school together back in the day, so this is a lot of fun for me. So welcome, Mica. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's so much fun to be able to reconnect with friends, old colleagues.
I know, it's been so long. I think it's been about 6 years since I left Indiana. That sounds about right, which is a horrifying amount of time. But woo, here we
Gosh,
are.
time flies so fast when
It's
you're having
it's blowing my
fun,
mind.
question mark.
When you're surviving, when you are
Right,
making ends meet. Oh my gosh.
right.
So, we'll dive right in, but first I want to get started with how did you get started in music and in composition?
Oh my God, that's such a loaded question.
I know. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, how did I get started in music? Do you want the very beginning or do you want like the practical answer?
Oh no, give me the whole thing, the very beginning.
So I started, I guess you could say, elementary school music class. I really loved. It was one of my favorite subjects. I say one of because at the time my true love was fine arts. Um, from a very young age, I wanted to be an art teacher, and that was my dream until I discovered how how happy music made me.
Oh.
But I sang in elementary school in the choirs and the Mustang Chorale at Middletown
Ooh.
Elementary School. Yes, for fourth and fifth graders.
What voice type are you?
A tenor, like a tenor
Oh.
one, like very
The star of the
my
show.
the star of the show. My low range, like it's embarrassing. Like I'm teaching oral skills right now, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna transpose this up an octave. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, it's a great time. Anyway, so I just music was just like a part of the fun that I had as a young adolescent. And then we get to middle school, and of course, I hated gym class, and the alternative to gym class was band. So there was a day in sixth grade, pretty early on in the year, where the band teachers came to the gym class and made the announcement, "Hey, if you're interested in band, come to the band room on such and such day after school and try out some instruments and see what you're good at and see if you want to join band." And at this point, I was really only interested in joining band to get out of gym because I hated gym. I hated gym more than I loved music. So, you know, um, so anyway, fast forward, the day comes. My mom takes me uh, to the after school band tryout a thon, and at the time, I was dead set on playing the saxophone. And I am not embarrassed at all to say that my family were super fans of Kenny G. So we had Kenny G on the radio all the time, and the sound of his sweet soprano, and
hmm
I don't know, it was just part of my family culture, and so like I was gonna be a saxophone player, obviously, to be just like Kenny G. And I say that completely unironically. That was the dream.
Was the goal
Was
to
the
have the
dream.
Kenny G hair too? That was like part of the package, right?
I unfortunately was not blessed with curly hair, but yes, that was, a perm was in my future.
Love that.
Um, so we get to the tryouts and I say I want to play the saxophone. And so they hand me one and say, okay, like just literally just like put your mouth around this thing and just like blow into it. And so I took a deep breath and I blew into it, and Caiti Beth, not a single sound came out.
Okay.
of the saxophone.
I think our villain origin stories here as horn players are exactly the same because I had the same experience with the clarinet. I wanted to play clarinet and I could not make a reed work to save my life. Could not do it.
Not even a squeak,
No, nothing.
not nothing. So I tried a couple of times, and after several failed attempts, they were like, "Okay, this is like not the vibe for you." Um, so they said, "Okay, well, like, can you blow raspberries?" And so they demonstrated a raspberry, and I was like, yeah, duh, 11 years old, fart noises. I've got it down."
Pro level. Pro level.
So they handed me a trumpet and told me to blow raspberries into the mouthpiece, and I did, and of course it made a sound, and they were like, "You're a trumpet player," and I was like, "Oh God, I this is not what I had in mind, but if it'll get me out of gym, I'm sure I'll be a trumpet player." I was so bad at the trumpet. Like, I was bad for an 11-year-old beginner sixth grader. Like, I was bad. I didn't understand the concept of like changing the notes with your lips. I understood that, well, there are keys on this thing, and, valves on this thing. I should be able to just change the notes with those. And as a brass player, you know that that is not the case. So I struggled for several months with the trumpet and was getting pretty bored. So one day they brought out this weird looking case that was just super awkward, and they opened it up to reveal this very shiny, swirly, with a very big bell at the end, this strange Dr. Seuss looking sort of instrument, right? And they say, "This is the French horn." And I was like, "I don't know what it does, what it sounds like, but it's beautiful and I have to play it." So I was like, "Mimi, pick me." And they were like, "You literally cannot play an arpeggio on the trumpet. So like horns probably not like going to be a great fit for you." So um, I was so upset and so petty that I had my mom write a note to the band demanding that I be allowed to play the French horn. And I'm sure I like made up some like excuse of being like, "Oh, this is the whole reason like I wanted to join band," which was like not true. I just like, was 11 and wanted my way.
You had to do what you had to do.
So yeah, so they caved in and they said, "Okay, fine, you can play the French horn." And it didn't go terribly. It was working out kind of fine. Um, so I did that for the rest of sixth grade, and through seventh grade, I got into the wind ensemble, which was like a pretty big deal at my middle school. Um, but I was a saxophonist at heart, and I really wanted to play the saxophone. So they wouldn't let me switch, obviously, because a horn player is more valuable than a saxophone player. So they
Hate to
made me
break it to
stick
you,
with the horn.
saxophonists. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah. For in terms of like public school music education, a horn player is worth 10 saxophone players, or I don't know. Um, but they did let me borrow a saxophone from the school. It was this old, ancient, moldy, I'm sure like 1920s, 1930s Busher alto saxophone. You open the case and
Incredible.
we're just immediately hit in the face with like this like overwhelming smell of mold. Didn't care. Went out. My mom made my mom take me to the music store. Bought me like one of those like $20 Yamaha plastic mouthpieces,
Mm-hmm.
a box of reeds. And this was like at the very beginning of the internet. This was before Google. I think it was Ask Jeeves at the
I was gonna
time.
say, was it back in the Ask Jeeves era?
So I went onto dialed in
Right?
my
Mm.
dial-up internet. Went to my search engine and I just typed in like saxophone fingering chart, and I came across this website that I think was called woodwindfingerings.org or something. And I printed out a fingering chart and I proceeded to teach myself to play the saxophone using this fingering chart, a tuner, which I already had. It just like, just like practice and learn on my own. So in eighth grade, it comes time for district band. And I was like, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at the saxophone. So I'm going to try out, I'm going to tell my band director that I want to try out on both horn and saxophone for district band. And she was like, "You're insane. Kids don't do that." And I was like, "Well, I am insane and I do that." Um, so she let me do it and I ended up making first chair on both after
Wow.
just like teaching myself to play the saxophone. So that was the point where I like started to realize that like music was like came pretty naturally to me in terms of just like I just like got it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to explain it, but I was like, this is like, I wouldn't say it was easy for me, but it was like compared to like gym, it was very easy
Right.
for me. So that summer, the summer between my seventh and eighth grade, the summer between my eighth and ninth grade years, I attended a jazz camp at Shenandoah University on the saxophone,
Oh, I know
where I
Shenandoah.
would, yeah,
Yeah.
nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, Winchester,
Beautiful little
Virginia.
spot. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's gorgeous,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely gorgeous. Um, but at this jazz camp, I met who would become my saxophone teacher, Dr. Adrian Ray. Shout out to Dr.
Oh,
Ray.
yay, shout out.
And, for me, the rest was kind of history because jazz saxophone became my primary focus. And at this point, I was like, I'm never looking at a French horn ever again. I'm sorry, this story is very convoluted.
I'm enjoying it, honestly. And this is stuff I didn't know about you. I had no idea you were ever a saxophonist, so I'm living for this.
Oh, girl, I was a die-hard saxophonist. My Chicago Symphony was to be the lead alto of the Airmen of Note jazz band, the Air Force Jazz
Sure.
Band.
Mm-hmm.
Like, big band was my passion. Um, and playing lead alto, and it was just, it was, I loved it with every fiber of my being, playing the
Oh.
saxophone and playing jazz, and I hated the French horn. God, I hated it so much.
I mean,
It
don't
was
we all
like
sometimes?
it was such an unforgiving instrument, and I had to like practice it in a way that I didn't have to practice the saxophone. I mean, I practiced the saxophone, it was my life.
Mm-hmm.
But the saxophone was just so much more instantly gratifying than the horn.
I have a very dear friend who says that the saxophone is the easiest instrument to learn, but the hardest to master. And
Absolutely.
there's like the learning curve is so different than the horn, where it's so hard to like get started, and then once you get it, you can make progress. But yeah, I understand.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So I'm in my freshman year of high school. I'm a jazz saxophone player. I make it into the jazz band as a freshman, which was unheard of. We had a super competitive jazz program. I mean, and to put this a little bit into perspective, like I come from a very, very small sort of school system. My high school had a jazz band, two wind ensembles, and that was it. There was no
Mm.
orchestra, there was no strings program, there was just like David Holsinger and big band, and that was, that was it. And that
That was
was,
what you did.
yeah. And
Hmm.
of course, marching band, which everybody had to do. Um, and so I was desperate to not play the French horn when it came to concert season. Well, my band director informed me that, we have 8,000 saxophonists. It was really like six, but in a band of 80, six is a lot,
Hmm.
it's a high percentage.
Six is plenty. Six is plenty.
um, so I think 80 is being generous. I think that might have actually been the biggest we ever were. Um, he said, you can play anything but the saxophone. So I chose the bassoon, Caiti Beth. I chose to play the bassoon. And I played that bassoon for a
Wow.
year and I was so bad. I I got first chair at district band by default. There were only two of us. So that so that only meant that the person who got second chair was just slightly worse than me. Um, and I became eligible to audition for All State because I was first chair at district band. So I went to this All State audition and heard like real bassoon players, and I had forgotten my music, and I asked a person, one of the other players, to borrow their music for my audition, and she was the only person that I beat. I was,
Oh
I know, I was second to
no.
last.
Oh,
I was so bad. I mean, I tried my woodwindfingerings.org. I got a bassoon fingering chart and with a tuner and like taught myself to play the bassoon, which is not really as possible with the bassoon as it is with the saxophone. Just saying, bassoon is a
right.
much
And were you making your own reeds
no,
or
I didn't even know.
just okay, good.
So at so this all state audition was my first experience seeing kids who had made their reeds, and I thought it was the stupidest thing. I was like, why would you make your own reed? You can literally just go to the music store and buy a plastic one, which is one that I was using.
Yes, we love a plastic bassoon
Plastic
reed.
bassoon reed. Like it didn't make sense to me why you would make one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was bad at the bassoon. So my sophomore year, my bassoon was in the shop when concert season started. So my only other option was to play the French horn, like pull the French horn back out of the case and like play it for a couple of weeks while my bassoon was being repaired in the concert band, because you couldn't just be in jazz band. You had to also
Mm-hmm.
be in wind ensemble or symphonic band. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll just like do this for a couple of weeks. It won't be that bad. Well, we were playing some pretty cool music, and like the horns had like not off beats.
Whoa.
And I was like, this is kind of not terrible. So I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Uh, I went to my band director and I was like, okay, fine. Like, I'll play the horn in the wind ensemble, but like, just so we're both clear, saxophone is my main gig. Don't ask any questions, just like let it happen. Okay. So I never practiced the horn. It was just like I showed up, picked it up, played it in band. Like that was the extent of my horn education. So super fast forward to my senior year of high school, I've decided that I'm gonna be a music educator. I'm gonna go to school for music, gonna go to school to learn how to teach a band, right? And so my band director was like, well, since you're going for music ed, you should audition on horn and saxophone to show them that you are like versatile in brass and woodwind, and that like might give you a scholarship, or like, which is like not how scholarships work. I didn't know that. I was 17, I didn't know. So um at the time we had a student teacher who was a horn player, but who was like a real horn player, who was like in college taking horn lessons. And so I like went to him and I was like, hey, like what do I play? And he introduced me to the Mozart concertos and the Strauss
Mm-hmm.
concertos. So I was like, okay, IMSLP was not a thing yet. So I like
Right.
begged my mom to buy me the Schirmer edition of the four horn concertos, the famous one, all
The one we all start on,
yes,
every single one of
all
us.
in F,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I think I got the Strauss concerto from a friend in band, a horn player who was taking horn lessons at the time. And I was just like, okay, so I'll just like play these. I'm like, I'll play through them a couple times, blah blah blah, whatever. So college audition season comes, and I audition on both instruments, and I get in on both instruments to the four schools that
Wow.
I applied to, which was kind of a shock to me. Didn't really know what that meant. But here's where the story gets really, really funny. So I'm still sorry, there's a gnat I'm swatting away at.
No, you're
It's
fine.
not my hallucinations, I promise. Um, so this is where the story gets really funny because it's still my every intention to like be a rock star, all star jazz saxophone player with the fallback degree of music ed. I could be a band director if this doesn't work out. So the school that I chose to go to, Virginia Commonwealth University, I chose because they had a legendary jazz program, um, and that was going to make my dreams come true. My
Hmm.
audition, on the other hand, was a little weird because I had scheduled I scheduled two auditions for one day. And upon learning that I was going to audition on horn, the horn teacher reached out to me, Dr. Patrick Smith. He's still there. And he said, "Hey,
Oh.
come down for a private lesson and a tour, and we can do like a private audition. It'll be really low key." And it was like the first time I was ever going to have a horn lesson. This was in like uh, January or February of my senior year of high school. So really, really close to the end. And so I went down and I had my first ever horn lesson, and I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. I did not know it was my first time hearing a horn played professionally. And I was like, I didn't
Hmm.
know the horn could sound like this beautiful. This is kind of neat. So I played my audition, and then my saxophone audition wasn't for like another month. So
Oh wow.
um, a month later, my mom and I drive down to VCU and show up for my saxophone audition. I have my saxophone with me, and I go up to the check-in counter, and they were like, "You don't have an audition today." And I was like, "I literally do have an audition today." And I think I had like smartphones weren't a thing, or at least I didn't have one. I mean, this is what
No.
2007, 2008, early
Oh
2008.
yeah, absolutely not. We were on the razors still, I think, back then, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah.
If we were lucky.
If we were lucky, I never had one. I had a rumor, the little slidey texty phone.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I think I had like a little Nokia, I think. Anyway, so the point being, I had like printed out the email because that's what you did to show people the email that you got is you printed it out on paper
Right.
because we're dinosaurs. And so I
Oh
showed
yeah, back
them
when we had to like print out directions to drive too, for the youngins who don't know MapQuest.
MapQuest.
Oh
MapQuest.
my gosh.
Oh my god! So I showed her this email, and she was like, "Oh, that's weird." So she like did some digging, and they had canceled that audition on my behalf because they had recorded or I had already done an audition, and they thought, oh, it's like saxophone thing must just like be a mistake, right? So I'm there with a saxophone, and they have no saxophone auditions that day, so the saxophone teacher is not there, and
Oh
the
no.
woodwind faculty had already gone home because there were no more woodwind auditions left. So I play
Hmm.
my saxophone audition, and I say this with love, for Dr. Patrick Smith, the horn teacher, and the brass faculty. And I played the shit out of the Creston Sonata. I it was my thing. It was, and I didn't really have any perspective about what an audition was supposed to be like. And since my first audition was private and casual, I just showed up in like jeans. And I remember the college band director, Dr. Terry Austin, legend, um, said to me, when you walked in here, based on the way you're dressed, I had no idea that you could play like that. And that will always stick with me because first impressions matter. They
Oh,
they
absolutely.
really matter. And I didn't know. So and then that same day I had my music education interview for the music ed program. So it's late March, early April, something. Letters are being sent out, and I received my letter from VCU, and it says, "You congratulations, you've been accepted to the music education program." No mention of an instrument, not a single mention. So I assumed, like the other colleges that I'd gotten into, that I
Hmm.
could just like pick. So in my mind, I'm picking the saxophone.
Right.
So I choose VCU. I'm picking the saxophone. I show up. orientation day. I look at all my paperwork and it says French horn on it.
Oh my gosh.
It says French horn on it. And I'm like, there has been a grave clerical error. So I'm doing the emailing, and I email Dr. Smith and I'm like, this is a mistake. And, he's very reassuring. He's like, well, you're music ed. So like you can take lessons on both. It doesn't really like matter what your primary instrument is. And I was like, I mean, I guess you're right, but this just like feels wrong. But like,
Mm-hmm.
fine. I didn't hate my first horn lesson. And, I
Mm-hmm.
was music ed and I liked, by this point I had learned all the jazz auxiliaries like flute and clarinet. I had like a little love affair with the oboe for a second. So like, like it would like make sense, right? It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
completely out of the realm of uh I don't know, logic
Possibilities. Yeah.
possibilities.
Yeah, sure.
um and he was like, but don't worry, so like if you hate it, you can switch in the spring. We'll just like figure it out. It'll be fine. And I gotta tell you, by the end of that first semester, I was so in love with the horn
Oh.
that it was just like it was it. That was it for me. That was it for me. And after a semester of being in music ed, a semester of taking horn lessons, in the spring semester, I switched my degree to horn performance. And that is how I sort of we got here.
It's like
You
the
asked about
happiest accident.
composition.
But yes,
You
composition, that's
asked,
the next step, I
yeah.
guess.
And we're going to be here for 7 hours.
I don't mind.
Um, Composition was a lot more, a lot, a lot simpler. I learned um, so I had a geography project in eighth grade that I had to do where we had to pick a culture. We were assigned a culture and we had to assigned a country and we had to like give a presentation on like part of the culture and me and my partner were assigned Ireland
Ooh.
and we were both in band and she
Hmm.
played the flute and I played everything.
Right.
um and she was like, let's play some like Irish songs, but like I said, the internet was in its infancy,
Hmm.
and it's not like I could just like go online and Google like, oh, like Irish sheet music. So I was like, well, I'll just like I guess write something
Okay.
that sounded Irishy. I don't know. So I like went to the music store and like bought staff paper and just like wrote like a duet for flute, and I think I played on the saxophone, something in the Irish style, what I consider to be the Irish style. Take that
Right.
with a grain of salt, half of a grain of salt. Um, but I don't know, it kind of like sparked something in me. I was like, oh, this is exciting. Like creating music is exciting. And so my band director, this was in middle school, we've gone back in time a little bit, had told me about a program called Finale Notepad that was free and you could download it off the World Wide Web.
Ooh.
And I'm sure that download took like 8 days and hogged up the phone line.
Oh, yes.
There was such a thing as what was it called? Cable link
Oh, I have no
internet by
idea.
this point,
I lived
but
in
we
the
didn't have
country.
it.
We
We
were straight
just
up dial up. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, we just had the dial up. So I downloaded Finale Notepad. I didn't know anything about music theory. I didn't know anything about anything. I would just like put notes on the staff and it would like you could play back what you've put on the staff, and it became sort of like a therapy for me. And
Oh.
it was really cool because I was creating music and that was really exciting. I was doing this with absolutely no intention of it ever being played. That was like, I was just making it was just like a game for me, kind of. And so this really like the word that I like to use is festered. This sort of like this passion just like festered in me, like ate me alive for years and years and years and years until I was like almost all the way through my undergrad degree. And I was like still like writing music that I would never play for anybody and never have anybody play. Um, I did have my band director read through something that I wrote in high school, and that was magical. And he told me
Aw.
that if I like made like good parts, like did like good engraving, which I didn't know what that word meant, or like
Mhm.
making parts, didn't know, really know what that meant. I'm pretty sure I just gave everybody a copy of the score. Um, that we would play it, but I never did that. So it never actually came to fruition. But so like I wrote my first quintet, woodwind quintet in was it my sophomore? It was for my junior recital. I wrote it for my junior recital, and that's how Three Colors came to be. I wrote that for my junior recital in college, and hearing that come to life in real time, instead of just like the finale playback was I was like, wow, this is it did something to me,
Aw.
and it wasn't so much about like, wow, I made this and now people get to hear it. It was just like writing for me was always it was like a diary, a musical diary, and getting to share that part of myself with other people in the same way that I heard it in my head was transformational.
Mhm.
So very shortly after that, I wrote and published Shenandoah,
Mhm.
and I wrote that for IHS. Our studio went to IHS in Denton, Texas. I don't remember which one that
Oh,
was.
I
That was
was
in
there.
2012.
Yeah, I was at TCU at
Oh,
the time,
nice.
so that was super next door for us. So that's crazy. We crossed paths and didn't even know it.
Yeah. Um, and then I just started, I wrote more and more and more throughout my just like journey as a musician. And, I eventually came to the realization that there was just like part of my voice that could not be fulfilled just playing the horn,
Mhm.
or at least so I thought at the time. So, much shorter story with composition was a lot more experimental and deeply personal,
Mhm.
deeply, deeply personal. So even to this day, when I write things, it always comes from a place of um, just like deep reflection. And I feel like that sounds like really cliche and
No,
obnoxious,
not at
but
all.
you know, I had a very not to get too personal on a public podcast, but I had a very troubled adolescence.
Mhm.
I came from a very unstable home. Um, we moved a lot, not by desire. We moved out of necessity, and um, money was not secure. And the way that I sort of like coped. I mean, I was the oldest sibling by 8 years of
Wow.
three babies,
Mhm.
and I had a mom who really really did her best, and she was as supportive as she could be, but she had her own demons that she was battling. And so I felt like a lot of times like I was the glue
Mhm.
that really helped hold the family together, but I was like her best friend.
Mhm.
And so the way that I would cope was I would write, especially after practice hours,
Mhm.
when I couldn't be like wailing on my saxophone at 2 in the morning. So I would sit at my computer with Finale Notepad open and just like put stuff down. And that's really how I got through. And to a great extent, composition is still very much that
Mhm.
for me. So sometimes I struggle with deciding what to write when I'm approached for a commission. And I ask a lot of questions like, well, what do you want it to sound like? And they're like, oh, well, no, we that's why we're coming to you.
Right.
We
We want
want
your voice.
you to figure this out.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you really want these like you really want like what's inside of me? Like, I don't know if you're ready for all that, but like, okay, here you go. Yeah, so I would say that like performing and being a horn player and being a composer are very much equal for me in terms of like my musical makeup as like a person.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I don't compose nearly as much as I perform, I think my compositions, I think as a composer, I'm just a little bit more, no, I don't know that guarded is the right word, but a little bit more protective
Mm-hmm.
of my compositional voice because it is so much more personal to
Mm-hmm.
me than my horn voice. Um, it's like if I miss a note in a public performance, it's like not that big a deal, right? But if I like pour my soul into this composition and it's performed, if people don't like it, that would kill me.
Right. So since you compose from such a vulnerable place, is it hard letting your compositions go into like the published, category? I mean, I imagine that would be maybe a little scary.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, and you'll notice most of the published stuff that I have are, with the exception of like Three Colors, they're arrangements
Mm-hmm.
of other people's music
Right.
because those are like fun and I don't have to get as serious with those. And, I can, just have fun with those. But I have thousands of unpublished, unpremiered, just like music that I've written
Wow.
that, will never see the light of day. And I
We'll never say never.
kind of, okay, yeah, yeah, I'm gonna die and someone's
Oh
gonna
no.
Harper Lee me.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
um, no, but yeah, but yes. The answer to your question is absolutely yes, a
Mhm.
thousand percent.
Yeah, I really can imagine that it's very soul bearing to express yourself in that way and then have anybody I feel like too much with composition people get so obsessed with the idea of whether something is good or will make it into the canon, which these are all nonsense
Right,
value judgments. I mean, I personally for years hated Debussy. That doesn't mean his music is bad, and I have since come around
sure.
after listening to Lemaire. But so
Lemaire will do that to you.
Lemaire will do that to you. Afternoon of a Faun didn't do it for me, but Lemaire did. Sorry, flute players. So it's I'm just gonna be the day where I just offend every other instrument besides the horn. Anyway, so yeah, I really think that it's very brave of you to try and let go of that fear as you let people perform your music because it's a gift that you're giving to all of us.
I appreciate you for saying that. Thank you. Isn't I letting go of fear I've learned is like the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's just we just are so much better for it. Learning to live our lives without fear, learning to
Mm-hmm.
create without fear. We
You can't play the horn with
deserve to
fear.
live. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
You, honey, you will crash and burn.
Every single time.
You
Every
will
single time.
every single time,
Mm-hmm.
and learning to function from a state of fear is miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've given some really great performances when I've been terrified, and let me
Mm-hmm.
tell you, I didn't have an ounce of fun. It was not fun,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and it really, like, music is supposed to be fun and it's supposed to be healing. And, I am not um, a purist by any means who operates under the assumption that music is the purpose of music is to serve the composer.
Mm-hmm.
I think composers have great ideas and I think we should honor their ideas, but I think there would be no music without the performer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the role of the performer is so important. And, um, we contribute too.
We're the medium that gets the composer's ideas to the ears of the person listening. And without that, it's nothing more than ink on a page, really. Unless you have perfect pitch, which I do not.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
I do not. No.
it wouldn't life be easier. Anyways, no, I completely agree with you. It's about the for me, music is about the emotions I get when I hear it, when I play it, and when we let ourselves get so wrapped up in this has to be technically perfect, this has to be beyond criticism. That's where we run into the real dangers, I think. And that's where you get people who burn out because they
Totally.
can't reach that fake idea of perfection. Um,
Absolutely. And I will be honest, I have almost quit so many times.
I just had this conversation yesterday. Should I quit? I mean, this goes on constantly. Being a freelancer, for
Yeah,
the record, for everyone listening, is hard. You get exhausted, and there's very little job security, and you just have to keep going. And in May and March and April, when you're just want to take a nap and you can't, sometimes you
yeah,
question your life choices. But we're here and we're doing it, and we do it because we love it, and that's the very real
yeah.
crux of the matter, I think. So.
The thought that I always come back to when I'm questioning if I should quit or not is I just remember like being 15 and really depressed and thinking about the things that I turned to go on without, being too dark and dramatic.
Hmm.
And it was always music, always
Hmm.
music. And there were performers on those recordings, or there were freelancers on the street that I heard that gave me joy. And, you know, after my mom passed away in 2012, I had this real existential moment about my relationship with music, and, being with her throughout her illness and in and out of hospitals with her. I really started to question, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm sitting here in this practice room, which was actually my bedroom, because I hate practice rooms. I
Hmm.
love to practice. I hate practice
Oh,
rooms.
same.
Like drilling scales and excerpts
Hmm.
and
And there's 80 people around
to
you
what
listening, and yeah, I hate that.
and I was like, why am I doing this? What does this matter? When there are like people with cancer or starving children, or like, I really did not feel like at that point in my life that what I was doing like mattered to anybody. um and then I had a really, really great support system after my mom passed, and lots of my friends from college came over and like would bring me treats or dinners, and just to like cheer me up, because I really compartmentalized that part of my life. Her funeral was on a Friday, and I was back in school on Monday, like getting ready for grad school auditions. Like,
Hmm.
I did not want to think about it. I wanted to just like be busy. And at the same time, I was thinking about quitting music. To the point where I even was applying for a degree change to go pre-med, and
Wow.
then I was signing up for the next semester classes for like biology and chemistry, orgo, all of that stuff. And then my friend Martha came over. She was a trombone player, um, and I was explaining all of this to her about how I was like gonna quit music because it didn't mean anything and it didn't do anything for anybody. And she asked me. She said, "Well, what has it done for you?" And I'm like, "Well, music has saved my life in so many situations." And she was like, "Don't you think music saves other people's lives?" And that just like
Game changer.
blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I'm getting like goosebumps remembering that moment.
Wild.
And I was like, "You're so right. You're so right. Music changes lives, and I think we need to remind ourselves that, at least that's my why."
Hmm.
Jeff, my mentor, former teacher, current teacher,
Hmm.
BFF,
This would be Jeff Nelson.
um, Jeff Nelson, um, always emphasizes the importance of like knowing your
Hmm.
why you play. And like, my why is music changes lives. It's not so much about whether I nail the excerpt or the solo or the performance, or I am there with a purpose. And I'm not so like, my ego isn't so inflated that I'm like, I am here to change your life. I'm here on the possibility that you leave here feeling better. I am on the stage playing this solo, playing this excerpt, whatever, you know, because it might make you feel better.
Yeah.
And that's enough for me to keep going. And I always come back to that because that's the role that music has always played in my life, you know.
I think that's the most beautiful
Um,
thing I've heard in a while. And I needed to hear that today because you got me. Oh my gosh. I'm like losing it a little bit over here.
oh no.
But no, it's beautiful and it gives me a lot of joy to know that there's like people out in the world who remember why we do this. And it's not all about, which contractor has the most power in an area or, all the stuff we get bogged down with. When it comes down to it, we're here for the music and we're here for how that can help.
Yeah, it's I'm in shackles
Mhm.
to music. I'm not going anywhere, you know, and it's I mean that's unfortunately the life that I've like I say resigned myself to, but like happily resigned myself to. There could be no more work for me ever tomorrow,
Mhm.
and I would still find a way to play for people.
Mhm.
I mean, and I've done it. I've worked multiple jobs, full-time, non-musical
Oh yeah.
jobs, and still like performing is was still part of my life.
Mhm.
And
You know,
maybe that's like podcast episode part two.
I know. I'm thinking we're gonna have to have a series about this, maybe. But I tell this to some of my students who are thinking about going into music, where I say, if you can imagine yourself doing anything else, go do that other thing, because you have to absolutely want to be here to do this. It's a hard field. It's, there's a lot of challenges, but the ones who are really here because they can't be anywhere else, they're the ones who make it, and that's not to say they
Yeah,
can't go do music in other areas of their lives if they choose to go do something for money, but it's
right.
yeah, you have to, it has to be your love affair.
You have to do it.
Yes.
You
Hmm.
know, there is no other alternative. Even I have tried
Yeah.
to get out.
Hmm.
You know, I have tried other alternatives. I have to do this. And the level at which that I do it does not matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much I'm being paid. It doesn't matter how much notoriety I get. I don't have to play in the Chicago Symphony or any orchestra
Hmm.
or, I just have to share music.
Ugh.
I and I think in order to pursue a career in music, you have to like reconcile the reality of like you might not have bill money
Hmm.
playing music.
Right.
You might have to do other things to do, but in those situations, and maybe this is an unchecked privilege of mine, but maybe in those situations, like you're like, okay, fine,
Hmm.
I'll do other things, and I still have the energy, the bandwidth to also do music.
Right.
And I feel very lucky that I've continuously had that energy.
Hmm.
Um,
Were there ever any
you
days
know,
where
I
it was hard to pick up your horn because you were so worn out from everything else?
oh, absolutely.
Okay,
When
yeah.
I decided to, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes. When I decided to leave my position, I was fourth horn in the Jalisco Philharmonic Orchestra
Hmm.
um, in Guadalajara, Mexico, and there were lots of factors involved in my decision to leave, but ultimately my decision to leave like rocked my world.
Hmm.
Because I had been operating under the pretense that you get one shot at having a professional career in a full-time orchestra, and I had just decided to quit. Wasn't fired, I wasn't pressured, I
Hmm.
wasn't, and I for um, very, very, very personal reasons decided to leave, and I thought my potential career was over.
Hmm.
So at this point in time, the months shortly after, I was considering a career in nonprofit management because part of my passion as a musician is getting music into the hands of people who don't feel like they deserve it.
Oh.
Um, and so I wanted to go into nonprofit management to figure out how to start my own
Hmm.
music related nonprofit. And I couldn't even like look at my horn because it felt like I was so disappointed in myself, even though it was my decision to leave, I had like severe like remorse. Like, what have you just done? You
Mm-hmm.
know, you had a full-time position playing your instrument and you quit.
Right.
You quit. And the reasons didn't matter. I mean, now it's been, what year is it? It's
It's 23,
been
I think.
6 years. Yeah. It's been almost 7 years since I made that decision to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know that my reasons were valid and they matter. And but of course, you know, things are musically going well for me now. So, you know, that
Hindsight is 2020 kind of thing.
yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that certainly helps the perspective. But um so like that period was like really a dark musical period for me. I didn't play for quite a while. And then, you know, I moved from Mexico to Indianapolis with my husband, which is where he is from. So it just made sense. You know, we lived in his dad's basement for several months, trying to put the pieces of our lives back together. And I actually joined a community brass band because I had to have music back in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knew who I was, and I wasn't getting paid work, but I was like, damn it, I'm going to play. So I reached out to the only horn player in town that I knew. I was like, hey, I'm a horn player. Like, I want to play the horn. So anything you got doesn't have to pay. Just I'd like to do it. He was the director of the Indianapolis Brass Choir. This is Darren Sorley that I'm talking about. And
Oh,
he needed a horn player for one of his concerts. And so I joined for that cycle. And it was just so nice to get the horn back on my face again and to make music friends in an area that I had not known friends before. I mean, even though Bloomington, where I did my master's, was so close, um, the School of Music isn't really integrated with the rest of Indiana, at least not in Indianapolis.
mm-hmm.
So I had no friends in Indy. I
Right.
mean, there were some people still left at school, but
Yeah, because I think I was gone.
I
I
think,
was gone by the time you got back for sure. And
yeah,
so
I
was
think Alyssa
Alyssa.
was still around.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe. Time.
She was around for like the rest of that semester
Right.
as, um, but anyway,
Also,
so I
shout out
was,
to
you know,
our mutual friend and love, Alyssa Cherson, who is probably listening
Alyssa
to this at some point. Miss you,
Jason.
Alyssa. Hope the Mets are winning.
What is that like a sports? Well, remember, I did not
Yeah.
do June.
See, neither did I. And then I got an Xbox, and now I'm a baseball fan. It's a whole story. Anyways, so
Oh my gosh, amazing. Yeah, I think one of the more difficult times to play my horn was when uh, we were getting back on our feet and we were living in a studio apartment in downtown Indianapolis, and I was working full time, and my husband was in beauty school.
hmm.
And you know, when you work full time in retail, you don't get to plan your life
No.
because the schedule is different every week.
Hmm.
And you know, I was gigging a little bit at the time, but I also like wanted to change my situation, so I like wanted to prepare for auditions. But the reality of my situation was, well, in order to take auditions, I'd have to take off of work.
Hmm.
And if I took off of work, I wouldn't make money. And I really needed to be able to pay my bills, but also taking auditions cost money.
So much
So
money.
I couldn't afford to go to the audition. I couldn't afford to take the audition if I could afford to go. I couldn't
Hmm.
afford to take time off work. And then like when was I supposed to practice?
Right.
Because I lived in an apartment, and on the days when I worked 11 to 7, you know, do I get up at 8 a.m. and practice in my apartment
Hmm.
at 8 a.m. for my neighbors? Or do I get home? Do I eat dinner or do I practice before 9 p.m.? You know,
Yeah.
it was this, and I began to like really, really hate my career choice for this reason because auditioning was so prohibitive. It was so cost prohibitive to be a human and a low income human and like try and advance your life
Mm-hmm.
in this field. And it was like, I hated looking at my horn because I felt so like, why didn't I quit when I had the chance? Or like, why? But again, I kept coming back, like, I had to keep reminding myself, you don't do this for the money.
Mm-hmm.
You know that. Like, not having a lot of money makes everything tough. It
Yes.
makes everything tough. And what you are experiencing is not unique to music. You're just a struggling millennial, like all of the other millennials on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a period of time where I had to remind myself that every single day, that my situation was not because of music. It was not
Mm-hmm.
because of music. And that music, if I wanted it to be part of my life at that point in time, I was going to have to work a little harder to keep it in my life. So I took every gig that I could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were months that I would not have like a single full day off because I was just like filling up my time with everything that was thrown at me. It didn't matter what it paid. I just like, I needed to play. I wanted to play. And if I couldn't practice at home, then I had to have the horn on my face.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to figure out a way to like turn my gigs into practice sessions,
Mm-hmm.
like with like clear goals, like, okay, I'm sitting down for this gig, I'm here to do a job, but also maybe I'll like also work on my sound.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'll also be super mindful of my articulation for this recording session. Or like, because it was the only way that I could have any sort of like intentional practice was like on the job.
Yes.
And slowly, I went from like maintaining as a horn player to like gradually getting better.
Mm-hmm.
um and it was a slow and arduous and painful process, and then COVID hit. And the rest, you know
And
I
here
don't
you
know.
are. You're doing the thing.
And here we are. And COVID for me was definitely
Whew. That was a
uh
time.
interesting,
Mm-hmm.
terrifying. I lost my full-time job.
Yep.
So against my will, I had all the time to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually used it because I told myself, you're going to regret it if you don't.
Right.
You're really, really going to regret it if you don't, because you've had so much time away from the horn
Mm-hmm.
out of necessity. And now you literally I was out of work for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if you don't use this, you're an idiot and you deserve every bad thing that happens to you.
Okay, it might be a little harsh on yourself there, but it's wild to me how similar our stories are in some of these ways. I don't know if you probably know this, but when I finished my master's in Bloomington, I wasn't sure what I was gonna do, and I was like, I'm just not sure if I'm cut out for this. I had gone from being a big fish in a small pond at my undergrad to being the tiniest little minnow at Indiana, and so I got a retail job and I was working full time and I was driving for Uber and Lyft on top of that. So I was working 60 plus hours a week, making all of that bank during Little Five. The Indiana kids will know what
Yes,
that is.
little five.
Oh, Little Five. So I was really, really lucky, and I'm gonna give a shout out to my manager Dave, wherever he is these days, where he was the area manager of this chain of stores that I worked at. And by the time that I was out of school completely, I'd worked my way up from like a part time sales associate to one of the managers of the store. And he was like, if you want to practice in the back room, do it. I don't care. It's not going to bother anyone. And I was like, are you sure? Like, this is your home base store and like I'll be interrupting. He's like, no, 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 do it. So on days where I would open the store, the schedule was you had to open by, I think you had to be there by 9:30, open the store by 10. You'd get like an hour break for lunch and you'd leave at 5, something in that range. So on those days, I'd
Mhm.
get there at 8 and I'd practice for an hour in the morning in the back room before anybody was in the mall. And then during my lunch break, I would make a bag of microwave popcorn. I got teased so much for that, to the point where when I left the store, I was given like an Air popcorn maker by the sales associates. It was amazing. Um, they were beautiful. So I would, eat my little bag of popcorn really quickly, practice for like 45 minutes, um, continue my shift, and then go home, eat a sandwich, and practice for another hour. And that was weirdly some of the most regular practice I've ever had in my life because I had this schedule that
Yeah.
I couldn't control. So it was, here's what I have to make the best of. And it was exhausting. I mean,
Hmm.
when you're giving so much of yourself to your job, because I think like me, you don't want to, do poorly at whatever we're doing. We're trying to
Right. Like I
do our
obviously want to
jobs
do a good
well.
job.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
So we're not going to slack off and do nothing at these other jobs that are not music related. And then to completely switch gears into that music world again and go, okay, here's what I'm working towards. Even if you're not seeing immediate payoff, that's the real
Right.
challenge. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's crazy how similar that feels to me. And I was really lucky for Dave. So thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But yeah. So we've talked about half of the things I was planning on talking about already, so this is very convenient. So I'm gonna switch gears here a little bit. We've talked about some of the greatest challenges just in general of where you've gotten to in your career, which for those who don't know, Micah is fully on faculty at DePaul University. I mean, just really, really doing the horn thing. It's amazing. Do you feel like you've experienced any hardships specifically based on your gender identity or any other demographic?
This is a really tough question.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised not really aware of my race.
Mm-hmm.
My I knew my dad's name was Jose Perez. Um, and that's about all I knew. I knew he was Mexican. I knew that Mexican people existed. I didn't really make the connection. My mom was white. My siblings are white. Their father is white. My grandma, my aunt are white. So um, I think the first time that was a real awakening for me about my race and the role of my race in classical music, the role of the color of my skin was when I was in Houston, um, doing my little grad school audition tour. I was auditioning for Rice at the time, and I had, I don't know, I was feeling bougie, and I had booked like a week in Houston
Mm-hmm.
because I really also, I wanted to get to know the places where I could potentially be studying for the next however long. So while I was in Houston, I snagged some matinee tickets to see the Houston Symphony play Mahler 1.
Ooh.
And it was February in Houston, so it was, of course, like 1,000 degrees already. So I was wearing just like, khaki shorts, polo shirt, and like shoes. Just like
Not like a
shoes.
full
I don't know.
winter getup like we do in Indiana. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't like dress shoes, but they weren't like ratty sneakers. They were just like shoes,
Just shoes.
probably like Sperry's or something. And so I go pick up my tickets at will call, which student price tickets were like $10, by the
Oh,
way.
love
If
that.
I don't know what they are now, but if they're still $10 in Houston, like if you're a student, you need to go snag
Mm-hmm.
them up and go watch the Houston Symphony.
Absolutely.
Um, so I picked up my tickets from will call, and I enter into the lobby, and there are people, and this is for like a 1 p.m. concert on like a Tuesday or something. And I walk into the lobby, and there are like women in ball gowns and men in tuxedos, and I didn't see anybody dressed like me. But again, I'm a music student. I was a full-time rat at this point, and I would show up to my university concerts like in like a hoodie and jeans, and like dressing up fancy, all of that. Like,
Doesn't enter
uh
the equation.
no, it had just like worn off for me at that point, because like as a classical music student, scholar, if you will, like,
Yes.
that that fourth wall was, she was gone. she
Mm-hmm.
was she was not there. I knew all about the people who play classical music, and I can tell you, ain't one of them fancy. So I was not inclined to show up to any of these events as like a fancy person. But I was like dressed like appropriately for public, you know. And I walk into the lobby, and I just feel these eyes on me. And then a woman looks at me, and I don't know if it was intended for me to hear, but I heard her say, "Have some respect." And a similar thing happened to Alyssa here at Jacobs, but that just reminded me that she had a similar
Oh my gosh.
experience. Um, and I was like, "Are you joking? Like, you literally don't know anything about me. You don't know that I'm like pursuing a career like
Mm-hmm.
this as a career. Like this is like me like I don't know. I'm trying to think of a metaphor, but I'm just like this is I'm literally in my element.
You're a disciple of music, is how I would describe it. Like that's you are.
Yeah, and
Nobody
I'm
could have more
sitting here
respect.
and I'm being accused of like being disrespectful, and I was so enraged
Mm-hmm.
by that. I can't even tell you how the performance went because I was so mad.
Mm-hmm.
So mad that this woman who knew nothing about me took a look at me, and I don't know if it was my skin color, if it was the way that I was dressed. It doesn't matter.
No. No. And people wonder why we have an elitism, issue in classical music. I mean, when the audiences themselves are almost turning people away at the door, she should have been thrilled there was a young person walking in the doors of the symphony. I mean, come on.
Like I I was just I was so stunned by that. And it really like ignited something in me. Like I was like, are you kidding? And so I started to reflect on my own experience as a young person growing up and like finding love for music and like what did I have access to? Or what were my beliefs about classical music before music school?
Hmm.
Well, my beliefs about classical music were that they weren't for poor people and I was poor. Um, that it wasn't for people who were it just wasn't for people like me. That's
Hmm.
what I grew up believing about classical music. I mean, I didn't hear my first symphony. um I mean, the reason I heard my first symphony was it was I think it was fifth grade, fourth grade, the Mustang Chorale, Middletown Elementary School choir. It might have been all the music classes. We took a field trip to Baltimore to watch the Baltimore Symphony play.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember thinking like, this is just like not this is cool, but this is just like not my element. And so I like didn't allow myself to engage with it at all. Like I didn't allow myself to enjoy it because like this isn't for me. What is it? What is this? Where am I? This is stuffy and I'm a kid um and that really persisted until I got to college, was auditioning for ensembles and was placed in the orchestra for the first time ever,
Hmm.
18 years old. And I was like, oh, they're just like people.
Hmm.
And then like my situation, oh, these are just like my friends. These are just students. But like members of the orchestra are just people.
Hmm.
And being an audience member, I'm just like watching people, and there was this like realization that like, oh, it's not this like the reality is not this like elitist uh
It's not a religious
at least like
ceremony, like.
well yeah, and at least like internally from the people making the music,
Hmm.
the people actually creating the product, so to speak, are not the elitists.
Hmm.
It's the marketing
Right.
of the product. It's the audience. It's the image. It's the access
Hmm. It's the
to
status symbol of it all.
absolutely.
Hmm.
And when um so that incident in Houston, and I was like, this is an issue. Because by this point, this was 2012, this was 2013, it was
Hmm.
2013. Like we all knew that by that point that our line of our profession was in danger, is in danger, is
Mm-hmm.
perpetually in danger,
Mm-hmm.
declining ticket sales, no subscriptions, and yet you have people who are still gatekeeping.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like it blew my mind. So I like kind of like went on a crusade about like a personal crusade shouting from the rooftops. I mean, I don't feel like I've actually accomplished anything, but just like letting people know about the experience and about how it impacted me, and like the ramifications of like attitudes like that in
Mm-hmm.
classical music are literally killing the industry,
Mm-hmm.
literally killing it.
So where do you stand on
um
the dress code for musicians on stage? Do you have any thoughts
I think
on?
it's so alienating.
Mm-hmm.
It's alienating for a number of reasons. I mean, it's like you compare pop audiences with classical music audiences, right? And what is the appeal for pop artists? Sometimes it's the case where you see yourself reflected in the performance on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is you see a potential for yourself reflected in the performance on stage. In classical music, I mean, the tradition of the tuxes is the traditional garb of the help.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody who doesn't know, that's why orchestras wear tuxedos, is because they were employees and that's how they were treated. The help for whom?
Mm-hmm.
The rich and the wealthy, and the elite. So those are like the audiences, or at least that's the image that is drawn to classical music, because that's the tradition that is still being upheld hundreds of years after the conception of the orchestra, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's 2023.
Right.
We have an audience crisis in classical music, and people are still asking why,
Mm-hmm.
which is crazy that people are still asking why. I mean, you can literally just walk into a concert hall mid concert and just observe. I mean, your act of being there, the simple act of walking in mid concert, like you could like deconstruct the scenario in so many different ways and get your why.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm not sure what the answer is. So what the attire should be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be in the room making those fashion decisions. But I know that like the tux and the tails, she ain't it.
Mm-hmm. And in my
Like that,
experience, the organizations that are most obsessed with the dress code tends to be the ones who treat the orchestra like the help themselves. So
right. Yeah, sure.
when people start remembering that we are here for the music and the people on stage are the ones performing the music, and no shade to any of my conductor friends, I have several, but without us, you're just somebody up there waving a stick. It's it becomes a little bit more humbling, where you're like, oh yeah, maybe it's not all about this idea that we are some rarefied, sanctified, hoity-toity event. It shouldn't be that.
Yeah, it is just so untrue because, musician will sit in a tux for 2 hours on stage playing for a bunch of people who make way more money than they'll ever
Mm-hmm.
see, and then go home and eat a peanut butter sandwich because that's all they
That's what we
have
can
for their
afford.
grocery budget a week.
Right.
And it's crazy. And what's even more crazy is that this was brought to my attention a couple of years ago, but like it's crazy to think that how many people on that stage could actually afford a subscription to their own orchestra
Mm-hmm.
of like good seats,
And
of
that
like
means you're wasting an entire audience space because we're the ones performing it. We love music so much. I would love to be able to go buy a subscription to all the orchestras that I don't play in this area. I mean,
yeah,
that's what I would do with my Friday nights when I'm not working. But it's out of my budget.
absolutely. And like that doesn't make any sense.
Nope.
And then back to the attire, there's also I mean, and this is something, so like back to part of your original question about gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
So I came out as non-binary in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
This was like leaving my job in Mexico was like boom, boom, boom right afterwards, because this was just like months that I had this realization, months after I left. And being in this career, immediately my thought was, what am I going to wear?
Mm-hmm.
What do I wear on stage? Because I had like just learned that the source of so much of my personal discomfort and my inability to function authentically in society was defined by the clothes I put on my body.
Mm-hmm.
And now I realize I'm performing in a very binary culture where you could either wear a tux or you could wear all black.
Mm-hmm.
And a tux meant you were a man and all black meant you were a woman. But like me, I feel like I am sometimes both, sometimes neither. What am I supposed to wear?
Mm-hmm.
What do I wear?
And how many times have you ever seen the options in the dress code email from a gig described as option one or option two, or is it always man, woman? There's no anything.
So recently, um, it might have been with the Evansville Philharmonic that does option one, option two.
Mm-hmm.
But so I have had conversations with orchestra managers about this.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm asking for permission to wear not one of the options, I
Right.
usually go with all black,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, just personally, if I'm going to be misgendered, I would rather be misgendered as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But like even that sentence, like, oh, if I'm going to be misgendered, I would rather be misgendered as. That's like so shitty to
Ideally,
have to
it would
like
be, yeah, we don't want you to be
say.
misgendered at all. You just want to
Like,
exist.
and
Like,
like honestly, like my gender doesn't matter on stage. So like, why do I have to make a statement of my gender by wearing a tux or all black?
right. Why does there need to
Um,
be a visual representation of this false binary that we're putting
I'm
out
just
into the
playing a
world?
French horn,
Right.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when I ask personnel managers for permission to wear all black, or sometimes I'll do like a modified tux with like a black shirt instead of a white shirt, just to like, because it's really important that you play from an authentic place. And I think people don't understand the impact on your music that playing from an authentic place has.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to find myself in environments where I was free to play from an authentic place, I'm a different player.
Mm-hmm.
So asking for permission, and then they'll tell me to my face, oh, that's fine, like, of course, wear whatever you're comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the email they still say men, tux, women, all black.
Right.
And I'm like, you've just missed the whole point of this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because like I was gonna wear whatever made me comfortable, and as long as it's within the visual aesthetics of the orchestra, like what are you gonna not have a third horn, a fourth horn, because my genetic makeup does not align with your pre-prescribed dress code? Like, I mean, okay,
Right.
that's
Like, good luck with
fine,
that.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's never happened, because you know I really do think people are better than we assume that they are. Um, but that's like a constant battle that I have to fight. And like find, especially as a freelancer, so much of it is politics. And I am constantly hyper aware of when I am being actively discriminated against, or when I am in danger of being discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
And I like change myself
Sure.
for those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there are several instances, and I am not going to name organizations or name names, but there have been several instances where I have been um, either not hired or treated differently, or
Mm-hmm.
because I decided to wear makeup for a week, or
Right.
because I decided to be vocal about pronoun usage on Facebook, or and it's like actively happening, and there are deniers who say, oh no, that's not the reason.
Right.
Okay,
We know the real reason.
like I don't need you to gaslight me, thanks. But it's a problem, and I would love to live in a perfect world where gender doesn't matter
Hmm.
and gender expression doesn't matter, but everything has become so polarized and politicized, and
Hmm.
I don't understand why it matters so much that I feel comfortable in my own skin.
Right.
Like, why does it matter? It should only matter to the extent that you should want people to feel comfortable.
Hmm. And it really sucks because it means your whole existence in these orchestras is like you're forced into this role of having to be an advocate for yourself at any given moment. I mean, it's got
And
to
it
be
is
exhausting.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't even fight the fight.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'm so tired that I just put on the damn tux.
Right.
Or I have reached a point where I'm overcorrecting people who misgender me because it's not worth my energy.
Right.
You know,
And you don't ever get to live free of that. That's just going on every moment of you being a musician. I mean,
absolutely. And I realize like my resignation for being misgendered is a privilege, because there are some people that it is life threatening.
yeah, absolutely.
And I'm fortunate that it's not life threatening for me. Um but I just think about how exhausting it is for me, for someone who is, you know, has a relatively mild case of gender dysphoria with respect to being misgendered. How exhausting must it be to someone who has severe gender dysphoria?
Hmm.
And when they're misgendered, they feel like they want to take their own lives. Like I'm exhausted, and I just cannot imagine how exhausting it is for some other people who it affects much more
Hmm.
deeply. Um,
And I think that's where it's on us, us excluding you here, who are not experiencing that same, you know, pressures and same struggles to really try and ease the burden when we can. And also be the voices and say, hey, it doesn't have to take somebody who is, non-gender conforming to say to a contractor, hey, your dress code policy is not inclusive. That's something that anybody could reach out. And the more of us who do so and who put, a foot down, eventually, I have to hope that we will outnumber the people who are actively trying to keep it the status quo. So this is my call out to anybody who feels like they have a modicum of power and wants to use it for something good. Talk to your contractors, talk to your people in their symphonies, and see if you can't help our friends and colleagues who just want to wear what they want to wear to a concert. It shouldn't be that deep. So
and it's not like I want to show up in red, you
well, I
know.
mean, that'd be fun, but right, we're not asking for
Actually,
much here.
the Richmond Symphony Orchestra in Virginia just changed their
Hmm.
attire, or at least I just noticed that they changed their attire, and I think it's really cool. I mean, it's still like um, within the framework of like a tux, but like they've added color,
Love
and
that.
something about like just like adding the color changes the perception
Hmm. I think it brings a
of.
little joy back. We need to have a little joy on
Absolutely.
stage. You know.
That's all we're asking for.
Oh, right. Just a little bit of happiness in this in this hellscape we call planet Earth. So, I've raked you over the coals with these heavy hitter questions, so please forgive me. I'll rapid fire some of the lighter fun ones at you now. So, who is your favorite composer besides yourself? It could be you, but who's your favorite composer?
Oh my God. I love Stravinsky. He was a
Ah.
quirky man.
Mm-hmm.
He is not known for telling the truth about himself or his compositions.
Oh, what composer was though?
Right. I just love his music. I think it is it and maybe it's because I'm a little new. I still consider myself a little new to music, even though I'm It's been my career. Um, I just love his ideas. His ideas, when I hear music of his, I'm like, people are still not really doing that.
Hmm.
Like, people are doing things that are like Stravinsky adjacent,
Right.
but like, especially his later works, I think they're just so wacky. And I'm not going to use the word brilliant because I don't hero worship, but I enjoy them a lot. And
Oh,
I just think they're super fun. I love Stravinsky. I'm a huge Stravinsky fan.
and favorite Stravinsky work?
Oh, Symphony of Songs.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Incredible piece. Wicked first horn part. I'm not biased at
Oh,
all,
brutal.
but really fantastic piece of music. Really
Hmm.
wonderful.
I love that. What do you do for fun outside of music?
Music.
More
I
music. I see
okay,
plants behind you. Are you a plant person?
okay. My husband and I are new plant gays. I say
Love
new
that.
because it's been within like the last 2 years.
Hmm.
We're just gays who own plants. Um, and it's kind of an addiction. I would give you a plant tour. I counted them the other day. We have 27.
Wow, I thought I was doing well with my like six, which are only partially dead. So,
That's great. You know, you're ahead of the curve.
it
It's
means they're
better than
partially
zero.
alive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
partially alive and better than zero of them.
Right.
Um, I love my plants. I really love to read. I
Hmm.
really like contemporary fiction because I'm annoying like that. I
What are you reading right now?
oh God. So I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks right now, which I consider that
Mhm.
reading. Don't at
No,
me.
that counts.
Like listening to an audiobook is the same. I'm listening to this book called Night Crawling by
Hmm.
Layla Motley, and it is dark and visceral and beautiful, and it is just go listen to it or go read about it. I don't want to spoil it for you,
Yeah, no
but
spoilers.
it's I'm about halfway through right now, and it's a lot, but it's beautifully written, beautifully narrated.
Hmm.
Um, but I love reading contemporary fiction. I like reading sci-fi. I like reading horror. Unfortunately, I'm a
Hmm.
big Stephen King fan, with full like awareness that like Stephen King and his endings, baby, we gotta talk. We gotta talk about those
Yeah.
endings.
We just need
Like,
to have a little mini Stephen King intervention. Like, please.
spoiler alert, his book Outsider is thrilling and exciting and dark and gross and horrifying. And the ending, I was like, are you joking me? Holly Gibney vanquishes the demon by hitting him with her purse. Are you joking?
Stop it.
I
That can't be
wish
real.
I was making
Oh
that up.
no.
I wish I could shake my monitor by how angry it makes me, because this was a book that I could not put down. It was so good. And thankfully, HBO took the show and they ran with it and they made it so much better. The ending so much better.
Ugh, thank God.
Oh my God. I read that and I was like, I quit life. I'm never
Like, I'm done.
reading anything ever again.
Ruined books.
So that's what I do for fun.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, Micah, we have come to the end. I cannot even begin to tell you how much I appreciate coming on. We're gonna have to do a part two because we didn't even dive into the nitty-gritty of how you compose and then your process with that. So we'll just do another episode sometime when we're free.
Sure, I'd love to.
Because I could just keep talking to you for like 3 more hours. Yeah, so everyone, thank you for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another new episode. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been Represent the Podcast. For more episodes, you can find us at Spotify and Apple Podcasts or on my website, www.caitibethmckinney.com. If you liked what you heard today, please rate us 5 stars or leave a review. Thank you for listening.